Rave to the grave.
Welcome to Rave to the Grave. My guest today is Maria 909. She's one of those people that you see around at all the different parties and you wonder how she seems to know everyone. Well, the answer is that she's a native New Yorker. She grew up in the Italian-American community around Seagate near Coney Island, and she's been part of the dance music scene practically the entire time she's been alive. She's worked as a promoter, DJ, artist manager, accountant, and fixer. One of those people working tirelessly behind the scenes to make sure that parties actually go off and people get paid. So behind the scenes, in fact, that Maria almost didn't want to get in front of this microphone. She's worked at NYC's most infamous 90s clubs, Limelight and The Tunnel, and been embedded with Lenny D's industrial strength camp and the hardcore scene since her preteen years. She also hobnobs with the kings of the New York City deep house scene via Judy Weinstein's Def Mix and helps out with the next-gen protest raves melting point. A self-professed, opinionated, honest, sarcastic, and obnoxious hardcore chick from Brooklyn, Maria tells it like it is, and she has a lot to say about the darker side of the scene, as well as the light at the end of the tunnel. Maria 909 is a true NYC original, and I think you're going to love this episode a lot. Welcome to Rave to the Grave. Maria 909, welcome to Rave to the Grave.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So,
I'm nervous.
Yeah, don't be nervous. It's just like the VIP room, the green room.
That I normally kick people out of all the time.
Just pretend you and I are in the green room by ourselves with that sad hummus that no DJ is going to eat.
Oh, it's so funny. It's always the one thing that I was like, why is there even food in here?
Yeah, I don't know why, but for some reason, every DJ rider seems to have like hummus and carrots on it and tea, and I've never seen anybody have any of those things.
Nope.
How do you describe what you do?
I'm a purveyor and a connector. I don't know if I necessarily do one thing, but I kind of always did everything and was just an integral glue in the scene. And it's just like, and they called me the fixer because I would always come in at the night of or whatever and fix the mess that people created because they didn't plan it out right or they didn't, and I always wondered, I was like, why do I always get asked last minute to come on board? Like, how come I never get asked as the party is being planned? Because then all of this could have been avoided and I didn't have to come in and fix it up and clean it. But yeah, basically that's what I've done throughout my life career in the New York City dance music industry.
Well, as I'm sure we'll get into, there's a lot of big egos in the dance music scene, and I think everyone thinks that they can do it and they're qualified and then realizes usually like 5 minutes before the doors open that that they've messed up. What are some of these things that you've been called in to fix for people?
It's just like Highway to Hell is paved with good intentions. And I think the map is put there, but who are you hiring? And a lot of the times people don't do what they say they're going to do. And, things fall through the cracks. Things like that have happened. And then, when you put drugs into the mix of it and, everybody's getting high at the party. And then it's just like, which is why I've predominantly always stayed sober, because it's just like, you can't solve a problem if your brain is completely scrambled. It's like, all right, you know what? You go be your mess in the corner. I'll take care of this. And most of the time I would just end up running people's parties.
That doesn't sound that fun.
Oh, well, you know what? I had such my heyday in the 90s that I just didn't even really mind after that. It was A-okay. It was fine with being the sober one. I mean, I would have my cocktails and I would drink, but I wouldn't party. Like when you're working, like, do you go to work high or, drunk, or I mean, it's a job. So how would you go to work?
Yeah, especially not the counting the money part becomes pretty horrible if
Yeah.
you're messed up. Okay, so like let's rewind a little bit. What was your first ever experience of going to like a club or a dance music event, electronic music event?
So when you grew up in New York City in like the 80s, it's hard to even say that because I think you're just immersed into a world of music anyway. 5 years old, I used to go to this roller skating rink called the Roller Palace in Sheepshead Bay, and my mom would just let me hang out there all Saturday from 5 years old until it closed, and it was a roller disco. Sometimes we would just stay until the nighttime session, and then my mom's like, all right, we have to go because a lot of the older kids were coming in, and it was just a different scene than the daytime one. That was my first experience. And that might not even be true because the El Dorado, we had a booth that my mom sold food out of in Coney Island. And I would always just be at the El Dorado, and bumping my ass off on the bumper cars. And, that Richard Long sound system was just always on, blasting amazing disco and 80s music. And Scott Fitlin, may he rest in peace, provided such an amazing outlet for kids in the neighborhood that would just come, and you didn't have to be any age. You were just, it's the bumper cars. All were welcome. I mean, like one of my favorite rides that I always would go to besides the El Dorado would be the Hellhole. And it's not there anymore, but, Polar Express, like, easy, easy, easy. I wish I would have recorded like this guy just going easy in this sample that, it's just stuff, but yeah.
So the Polar Express is that ride that goes around and around with the cars, right?
Yes.
And
And
had a
they
DJ.
had a pumping system, and it would be a block party like every night. Like it was just, that was fun. But it was kind of it got dangerous towards the end of it, which is the reason why I think it actually closed.
So tell me a little bit about growing up in Coney Island in general, because you have kind of all of these different communities that are sort of mixing together out there, right?
I grew up in Seagate, which is the tip of Coney Island. It is a gated off community that people thought was so elusive, but the heyday of Seagate was came and went a long time ago. Seagate was a neighborhood where the governor, mayors, all the Vanderbilts, all Broadway actors, it was their summer getaway, and they had all their mansions and whatever there, and it was cordoned off from the rest of Coney Island. They had their own yacht club and everything. And but that ended probably maybe towards like the 40s, 50s, and it just turned into a regular like middle class, working class neighborhood. But you still had some of your elite rich people, but not many. And Hasidic Jews lived there, Orthodox Jews, Muslims, Russians, Irish, Italians. It's just a really, really big melting pot of humans. So I always grew up around everybody. I've never been segregated, which I really liked, and which is why my father kind of moved out there from Bensonhurst, because he's like, I left Italy to get away from Italians, not to move to a country and live with them. So, thank for my dad for giving me an experience of variety. But growing up in Coney Island in the 80s, it was like in flux because the neighborhood was completely knocked down. All you had was maybe some original standing buildings and projects and developments. And then the rest was all rubble, burnt cars. People came to light their cars on fire for insurance jobs. You had feral dogs running all over the place. People dumped their garbage. So I would drive through a war zone to get to my neighborhood. And then I think around 1983, 84, 85-ish, they started building all the low-income housing, like the one-family row houses that you see there today. But I kind of liked it when there was nothing and it was just all these empty lots. I liked it when nobody was there. It was a really interesting place to grow up.
So you were at the roller rink. You already must have had a consciousness about what a DJ was because people were DJing at the roller rink.
Oh, yeah. That's where I first heard of Lenny D Frankie Bones, was my introduction to these guys. And, it was this South Brooklyn. It's like, I grew up with like Victor Calderone, Gene LaFosse, Beltram. It was just like Ralphie D. Like, it was just music. It was just it. It's like, if you just didn't do music, you were just a geek in school and that was it. So there was like two things to do. Just be heavily involved in like music and like the dance culture, or just be like in school all the time and not really have a life.
One of the things that kind of blew me away when I kind of uncovered more of the history of New York music was that Lenny D. I knew about Frankie Bones, but that Lenny D and Victor Calderone and some of these other people that you associate more with, like anything from hardcore industrial techno to really gay circuit hard house. But so many people were making freestyle and the sort of roots of New York house music before they ever splintered off and started playing like crazy 200 BPM techno, for instance.
Well, Lenny was Arthur Baker's assistant. And so Lenny was there for a lot of those records. What was the record label for Streetwise and, everything that like John Roby and all that stuff, like Lenny was there and he learned from being in that atmosphere. And, but like I said, you're just born into music in Brooklyn. Like that's it. It's just, your passion and you go with it. And, so these guys, and it was Tommy Musto really is like a ringleader to all that too. He had Northcott and Tommy had Underworld, all these amazing record labels that released just all these local artists. And it was Lenny D, Frankie Bones, and Omar Santana, How and Little. It just so much. I call it the lost classics because I don't even think the world understands what a contribution New York City made to music. Everybody thinks techno came out of Detroit or this or that, and nobody realizes that I think it was like freestyle developed into something else, and like techno and early rave, and it's like and New York City was there, like Mondo Music from Queens and was R&S Records. And, nobody really knows that like Gene LaFosse and Victor Calderone worked with Beltram on the most popular remix of Dominator. And, that's Gene blowing the kiss when it goes, I want to kiss myself. Mwah, that's Gene LaFosse, and it's just like, I know so much of like the history because I was kind of there growing up and like just being not a fanboy, but kind of like a fangirl. And it was just like, I was buying the records. My mother would take me and I would just go record shopping. And at such a young age, my record collection before Sandy was pretty impressive. It's sitting in a graveyard in my garage now, but I don't have the heart to throw it all out. So it's just sitting there rotting. But
so it got water damaged.
Oh, then my
Hurricane
basement was
Sandy?
completely flooded with 8 feet of water.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah, it was pretty heartbreaking. It's my life's work basically, and I went to work for music distributors just because I was like, I can't afford this to pay for records anymore. I need to go work and get them for free. So I went to work for Watts Music like in the late 90s. And that was a great job. But then like everything, it just started collapsing. The record industry started, like vinyl started, and it was heartbreaking to watch the death of it.
So of these guys that we're talking about, Lenny D and Tommy Musto and Frankie Bones and Omar Santana and whatever, who was the first one that you got to know or the first one that you met?
So I grew up with these kids in Seagate. I call them my cousins. They really weren't my cousins, but like Italians. Again, we're all paisans. You know each other from the family. So I hung out, and I consider them my cousins. So Dario, Jerry, and Carmine. Like my partners in crime. We got into so much trouble. My parents hated it. Jerry and Dario's cousin lived next door to DJ Repeat. And Repeat was resident DJ on Friday nights at Limelight. So we would go into Limelight when we really weren't supposed to. We were like 14 or whatever, and I was going to Future Shock on Fridays because we would go listen. And and so it's kind of like all a blur because I was already going to the record stores in Caesars Bay Bazaar, and Bones was selling tapes out of the car stereo shop in the back of Caesars Bay. And so it's like, and you see these people in passing, but I was so young that I didn't really. You can't really hang out, but like we all knew each other in passing. And then 1990, I think they opened up Groove Records on Avenue U, and I was just always going there. And, and I just became like this fixture. I was just always around. And just eventually was like, okay, here's Maria. It's just like, I was just always there. Bones and Ralphie and them would do like these parties on Coney Island Avenue, and they were like the predecessor to the Storm Raves, and I just wasn't old enough. But I knew about all of the parties. I just couldn't go because I wasn't old enough, you know? And I just couldn't wait until I got old enough. And then by the time 14 years old came around, I was just like, that was it. Like, all bets are off and I don't care, and I'm just sneaking out and whatever. And then eventually I just dropped out of school and went to work at Limelight and the clubs. And I had other jobs in interim because the clubs really didn't pay you. You really basically worked for free just to get in and to be there. And, you know, I was like, all right, this is like, you know, my apprenticeship. I'm just like building my knowledge and my resume until, you know, whatever. So.
Right. You're doing your internship at one of the most famous nightclubs, I think, in New York history, at least for the 90s, the Limelight. Maybe you can describe what it is for people that have never heard of it or weren't there.
Oh, so the Limelight is a defunct church, a deconsecrated church on 6th Avenue and 20th. It was just a nightclub that Peter Gatien owned since 1983, I believe. And it went through a couple, you know, it went through its waves, and then it just started bustling back to life in like the 90s. You had this Guido promoter from Staten Island, Lord Michael, that I think everybody didn't really like because he brought the borough kids into the city and gave us a home because we didn't really fit in with the discos and the Guidos that were like, and the clubs that were happening in Staten Island and Brooklyn at the time. So we were kind of like the outcasts, and he just gave us a home. And, you know, then you had, I hate to mention his name, but that like, you know, Michael Allig with the club kids and everything. But I really didn't get into the whole club kid scene. It just wasn't for me. I just always thought it was kind of really dark, fake about it, because it really wasn't about the music. It was more so about the way people looked, and we were just dirtbags from the boroughs, so it really wasn't about the way we looked. We really just loved the music. We grew up, you know, we had our champions like Lenny and Frankie and, you know, like Gonzo, and we were just like, we were just rallying behind these guys, and it was the party, and with all of our friends, we were just we could care less about how good we looked, and they just cared all about what they looked like. So I was like, okay, you know, it was like two separate worlds in like one, but maybe 3 or 4 worlds, because you had goth nights, you had your hip hop room. It was just this melting pot of music. You know, if you didn't want to hear one thing or you were bored in one room, you walked into another room and hung out there for a little bit and met a whole new crew of people. And I think that's what the beauty of the 90s club scene was, just having so many different experiences in one night, in one place. You don't really have that anymore.
While we're on that topic, just for a minute, I was wondering, you know, I think it's probably like a shock in some ways to see, you know, that Party Monster get made into a movie, and there's like weird people out there that kind of fetishize this thing that happened with Michael Allig, you know, murdering Angel and all this stuff. What did that feel like when it was actually the time period where that was happening? Like, what was your response and the people around you response?
We hated him. He fucking sold everybody out to get a lesser sentence. He ratted on everybody. So everybody that I know, a lot of people who have been out of the business and didn't deal drugs in years, got arrested and sent to jail because of Michael Allig, so he could get his like sentence reduced. He was a rat. He was a rat. He was a murderer, and he was a rat. He was a narcissistic, psychopathic prick. There was not one good thing about that person, okay? I don't know why people fell in love with him. He was a Pied Piper in a bad sense, I guess, you know? But, like, people are attracted to bad people. Like, why does Charles Manson have followers? I really equated Michael Allig to Charles Manson, to Jim Jones. I would put him in that category of a human being. He was just never my cup of tea. Like I said, I stayed away from the club kids. I hung out with Mr. December. I hung out sometimes with Astro and Desire. But other than that, like, I really, like, the club kid scene wasn't my thing. Manhattan was the city. Brooklyn wasn't, I mean, even though we are New York City, it wasn't the city. Brooklyn was Brooklyn. Queens was Queens. It was the outer boroughs. The raves always happened in Brooklyn. You know, the clubs were always in the city. You had Spectrum and what the hell? I think it was called the Crazy Clubhouse or the Country Odyssey. It was always a club after Odyssey, and it was just different renditions of it. But it ended up becoming like a gay club, a really, really good gay club in Brooklyn. So that, you know, you had Pastels, like Legacy, the Wave in Staten Island, Metro 700s in Long Island. You know, you had clubs. But in Brooklyn, if you wanted to really go clubbing, you went to the city because it wasn't, you know, for that experience like Emerald City, Palladium, Tunnel, USA, Sound Factory. They were all in the city.
So could you guys tell, like, oh, those are the kids from Queens or those are the kids from Staten Island? Or like...
Yeah, just by the way we talked, you know, and the way we dressed. You know, I mean, and the girls got dressed up. But you know, and then we started getting dressed up a little nicer. You know, like but we would still be in rave gear. It would just be like really new rave gear.
But was there different rave gear depending on like kind of what neighborhood that you came from?
No, I don't think so. I mean, everybody had like their wide leg pants, the Jenkos, Adidas. A lot of the Guidos loved their tracksuits. So the Guido ravers, as I would call them, because that's what it was. You know, everybody like says so much shit about the Guidos, but they're basically who started the rave scene in New York, and they loved their tracksuits. Either it was Sergio Tacchini's or Adidas, you know, but like everybody had like their Pumas, their Kangos. It was just, you know, a look, and with their bead. I don't know if you remember, like, but the beaded necklace, like the silver balls, like it just like, you know, this they had their look.
Yeah, I always wondered where that silver ball thing came from because you'd have like different sizes. You could get the giant ones.
Yes.
You could get little tiny ones, or you could wear like all the sizes of the silver balls.
Yeah.
Okay, around when were you 14? Like what year are we talking about? Okay, so Limelight at 1990, who would have been playing there and what kind of music would you have been listening to?
It was really like rave because hardcore really didn't become such a thing yet. It was like really like techno, like O Fortuna and all these things, like, and with like a lot of the underground stuff, like, you know, and it was like house records. But I don't really, I went once or twice because I like underground resist. Jeff Mills was like one of the residents, but I didn't go as often or every day. And it was like sporadically, you know, because I went to a lot of the raves too. And it was just very blurry, very, very, very blurry because I was going to Thunderground, Van Duzer, you know, so I can't, I was like trying to think of the timeline today and I'm like, wow, like those years are really blurry to me. I mean, maybe it was all the ecstasy and it was like, you know, just, I was there, but I was someplace else. You know, and that's why I was like, oh, like, how come I sobered up so young? I think like by the time I was like 21, I started like really like curtailing my use of anything and was on the path of just complete sobriety because I was just realizing that I was like losing my mind. And then my friends were ODing, who was being murdered and drug deals go wrong. Like everybody glorifies things, but nobody really talks about the darkness of these scenes. And there is a massive darkness to the nightlife world.
Definitely. Did you feel that? I mean, you probably didn't feel that totally already by like 90 because you were just getting into it.
It was brand new, yeah. But also it was brand new. Like, you know, it was just happening. It was just occurring. I think by the time 1996, like 1994 to 96 were really hairy years. I say 1995 was the year that the rave scene died. Completely, like that was it. It went from what it was in the early 90s to the commercial mega like money makers that you see today. To me, 1995 was the last year of the rave. New York City, it was 1995 was like the last year of like the real pure like rave scene because then it went from a couple of hundred kids that were just all locals and then people started coming in from everywhere and it grew to like 5,000 and that was it. That uniqueness and it was kind of over at that point then. You know, where you could walk into a party and not really know anybody.
So in terms of raves, not clubs, but raves, what do you consider to be a couple of the best parties that you've ever been to in your life?
April Fools, the first one. And I'm there were so many before that, but I helped Guaranteed Overdose. I hate to say the name of the production company because, it's like, these names were all tongue in cheek in the beginning. And then they took on another meaning as things progressed because, wow, people did OD at these parties. It was a nightmare, which is why I say 1995 was like the last year of the rave, because after that, you really started having problems with massive amounts of copious drugs. And, people saw what a moneymaker it'd be. Oh, we're going to go to this party and sell this much drugs and make this. It just became something else. But April Fools, it was Delta 9, Lenny D, Strict 9, Decipher, Nikki Fingers. It was just intense. Aristotle from Local 13 would bring up these massive 6-foot nitrous oxide tanks. There were balloons going around the entire party, ecstasy up the wazoo, and it was this full-on great party. And it was one of the last good parties of my youth. And yeah, everybody was alive, kind of. Everybody was alive, and it was just. It was just phenomenal. The music was on point. I mean, people played live, but they really played live. They brought out their board. You can see there's Delta 9 recorded a lot of these parties back then, but he only released this 1 minute of this in particular party in a video, and you see me bringing balloons to the D, and this wicked smile on my face, and that I don't remember if it wasn't for this video, and if it wasn't for the fact that I had the VIP pass. And I wouldn't remember most of this night either. I used to be Maria Hardcore in the early 90s because I used to hang out with these two kids called John and Matt Hardcore. And they used to be called the Twin Towers because they were well over 6 feet. And we would stand on stage in Limelight, the whole crew of us, and we would just bang our head. It was, it was just magical moments like that I really, really love and I will cherish forever. But I was Maria Hardcore back then. And then it became Maria 909 as hardcore fell out of fashion. I was like, all right, I can't call myself Maria Hardcore. It sounds like a porn name. So I was like, what creates hardcore techno? And I was like, oh, it's the 909. Okay, so I'm Maria 909 now. But I had my production company was Distort 909 or Distort the 909. So it was just a easy transition. But John and Matt threw this party. I think it was 1994 in the tennis bubble at Caesar's Bay Bazaar. All hardcore. And it was this, and that's what we did. It was just we started separating from the regular rave crews because we liked drum and bass. We liked house music, but we really just loved hardcore, and we just wanted to be in it day in and day out. So we started throwing our own parties specifically, and we had a really nice crew of people that just wanted it too. And I don't know if we were speaker worshipers or the bass, the frequencies were just different. A wall of sound and just distorted bass coming at you, and it was just just an outer body experience. But yeah, so 1993 to 1995, that's what it was. And then you had this crew, the Cannabis Action Network. They were into it too. And they did this party called Evergreen underneath, is it the Kosciuszko? Not McGinnis, but yeah, the Pulaski. No, the Pulaski is...
Pulaski goes to Long Island City.
Yeah, no. Review Avenue. It's a block right by the cemetery that was Rave Alley. It's it's Steiner Studios now. But prior to the movie studios coming in, we used to rent out all those buildings and throw raves. Where the Greenpoint Avenue Bridge is? It's that block right before. And that whole entire thing is a strip, recycling factories, empty warehouses, and for a period of a year, we used to do raves in all these different buildings there. It was Aftermath, Evergreen, the Lost City. Oh, the Lost City. Oh, setting up the party, right? Or they would turn on the lights and the rats scattered everywhere. And we would just party in the most filthiest places. I can't see kids doing that today, really. Everybody goes in and they clean. We used to wear, that's why I was I'll wear a mask. We used to wear masks back then because you didn't want to breathe in. When we were in asbestos factories, we didn't even know where we were half the time. We didn't care. We would just break a lock, go in and throw a party. And Williamsburg, along Kent Avenue, a lot of abandoned, burnt out buildings. And we used to dead of winter, We didn't care. We'd build bonfires, speakers, and it was just insane. It was just insane. It was just 4 years nonstop partying every single day. And one of your questions was, how would it be like going out with me? Insanity. It would just be complete insanity because I would do rounds. I would stop at this party, that party, this party. There was so many things happening. And then, all right, we're going to end up at what time was Lenny going on or whatever? Oh, well, this is where we're going to end up. And, most of the time it was like some rave in Brooklyn.
What was your favorite thing to wear back then? Like the thing that you still wish that you owned? Or maybe you do own.
No, I don't anymore. My Adidas Rave jacket. It was like 3XL. And back then I think I was like maybe 120 something pounds. And this thing was like a big garbage bag on me. I have a picture of it at this rave, at this Digital Domain party. Winterfresh, I think it was, out in Wayne, New Jersey at a skate park. And I have like my hat. It was just like this outfit that I used to wear in the winter. I loved raving in the winter. Black and white was always kind of really my thing, like even since I was young. And like my Adidas rave jacket with the stripes and like my sunglasses and my hat. That was like kind of like my go-to outfit. And I really basically always wore industrial strength shirts with a pair of jeans because we were an army. We were like Lenny D's army, and he had his followers, and that's what the early 90s was. We worshipped Lenny, and we followed him, Nikki Fingers, DOA, like Sally and Carl Currency. That was it. We just followed, and we just did parties, and we were happy.
So Industrial Strength, for those who aren't familiar, is Lenny D's record label dedicated to industrial techno, hard techno. Some people
Hardcore.
call it gabber.
It's not people. It makes me laugh when they say gabber. Gabber was just like a handful of records like that had like guitar. It's not really a thing. It is a thing, but it's not.
I was going to get an earful when I said gabber, by the way.
And like, it's like, like Rob G, gabber up your ass. It's like, it's just a certain segment of what hardcore is. It's not hardcore. But I get it. The kids love the outfits. They love the dance moves, the nostalgia of it. You see all the videos of like the Dutch kids really messed up on like maybe 10 hits of ecstasy. And it's just, maybe I'm really happy that there weren't cameras now back then.
So we heard about the tennis bubble. We heard about some warehouses, but where...
The party was asphyxia in the tennis bubble.
Like, where were the wildest places that you've ever been to a rave or party?
So Uptown Underground was this rave crew from the Bronx, and they broke into the silo of the Whitestone Bridge, and they threw a rave called Magic. We were all coked up and on shitloads of ecstasy, and like Frankie Bones was DJing, and Neurotic. I don't know if Bones set the speaker on fire or if Neurotic set the speaker on fire. But we were partying in like mid-calf high water. We didn't give a shit. All of a sudden, Bones is playing. The speaker goes up on fire. We're all raving. People scaling the wall. Like, that was really an insane night. And then after that, we just walked a couple of yards and we partied at Rave Rock, because like we called it Rave Rock. So that's where a lot of the after hours after the raves happened, was in the Bronx at Ferry Point Park at Rave Rock. And because it just didn't end. The party just didn't end. And then now that I'm remembering, so across the street from Wagner College in Staten Island, there used to be this abandoned monastery, and we used to throw a lot of parties in there. And then there would be these Satan worshipers, like it just all these flooding memories of like this crazy stuff.
Wait, what's up with the Satan worshipers?
We don't know. They were just like in the monastery, like doing whatever. So
they were like doing their thing.
They were doing their thing while we're throwing like our outlaw party. And like, we did a lot of outlaw parties. A lot of them in those days. But I just think New York City as a whole, it was just crazy. All of it was just crazy.
So going back to the Limelight now, what did you start doing at the Limelight when you started working there? And how did you actually get to work there?
So Anthony Acid, I brought a flyer home one night from Limelight, and my sister-in-law, she wasn't my sister-in-law at the time, but she was dating my brother. She saw this flyer and she's like, Anthony Acid. And I was like, yeah. She's like, that was like my high school sweetheart. I can't believe, like, you have to say hello to him for me. And so then next time I went back and I saw Anthony, because I was already like going and hanging out. But Anthony was like, wow, Maria. And like that was the love of, one of the great loves of his life, high school sweethearts, I guess, that I never had one, so I wouldn't know. But and he was just like, well, you know what? You're a golden, I'm taking you underneath my wing. Like, that's it. Like, became like a big brother again. So, and then I started doing his call list. And it was like call list because he was cousins with Lord Michael. And that's it. That's how it all started. I just started doing the call list. And
what's the call list?
You would have like a list of people's phone numbers, and I would get to Limelight at like 5:00, and I would start calling up people to see if they wanted to come out. I would be like, okay, like you had a comp list, you had a reduced list, calling up people, like hundreds of people, like, and just having the same conversation. Hi, what are you doing? This is Maria. I'm calling for Anthony Acid's list of whatever the list was called. Are you interested in coming out tonight? Oh, really cool. How about you're on this list? And do the same thing over and over and over again until basically the club opened. So depending on how many people would come in, I would get paid. That was one of the games of like being a sub promoter. You always got screwed by the head promoter. They would get the money and they would not really give you the money because they would lie about what would come in on the list and be like, oh, well, you know what? Nobody really came in. We can't pay you tonight. But here's drink tickets. And then I would just be there all night partying.
I mean, a lot of these people were getting in for free, right?
You had a lot of people were getting in for free. And a lot of people, it was just the tourists. Like you made money off of the bridge and tunnel crowd and the tourists. But like you had your regulars that were there all the time that, you just, because you need people you need bodies in the club. Nobody has that kind of money all the time. So you just had people getting it for free. Then the people who were there for free all the time started promoting because you're there anyway. You might as well promote and try to make money, right? That's how that happened. And then who started dealing drugs on top of that? Just like to supplement their income. I got a day job. I didn't want to be a drug dealer. I probably would have did them all instead of selling them anyway. So I just didn't want that responsibility.
So you would promote, you were involved in these other promotion crews. So when you would be working at Limelight, you would also be flyering for your events too. So it kind of played double duty.
Yeah. You flyered, you went out and you flyered. And then I just started being a leader of a distribution team and hiring kids to do all of that. And I would just go and check up on them all night to see if they were where they were saying they were. And, okay, because then you want to pay the kids, but you don't want to pay them if they're not there. And a lot of the times the kids would just dump their flyers in the garbage, or and then another telltale sign is if you don't see a flyer on the floor. Come on, people throw their flyers on the floor. So if I'm at a spot that you were supposed to be and you told me you're promoting, but I don't see one of our flyers on the floor, I know you're lying and you weren't there.
You actually got this great management training from doing all that about how to be a boss and how to make people do their jobs.
Yeah.
I think I saw, I don't think it was on your Instagram, but I think it was on somebody was from around that era was showing a bunch of business cards, had a collection of business cards with different promoters. Oh,
I think that was one of my phone,
one of
my pictures. Yeah, like Sal Savant, Madam X, Ego Trip. What was the guy's name? My friend Patricia Baker. I'm not going to say her real name, but Patricia the Baker. She worked with Daryl Darren. That's it. And so she was one of my best friends, and she would be she would do all the lists for the tunnel guys, and Michael Francis, Mark Anthony, Fred Asher, who I used to torture him and call him Right Said Fred because he looked like Right Said Fred. He hated it.
So these cards were promoters' phone numbers, and you could call them and be like, "Hey, I want to come to Limelight tonight."
Like info lines. It was or a beeper because the beepers were the thing back then. Who would lose them? You would lose so many beepers in the course of the night at the party, and I was like, "Screw this! I don't even want this anymore."
Did you have any other duties at Limelight, or you worked at the tunnel as well, right?
Yes. Well, you worked at all the clubs, basically. That's what you did because they were all in-house. So one promoter would do this party one night, Palladium really was the RPG crew. They would do the burst parties. And so when they do the burst parties, we would promote that. I wasn't my party, but I promoted the party. But everything was in house. So no matter, even if you were promoting one thing, you still promoted all of it. And I think that's what also helped make his clubs work well, because it wasn't just every club out for itself. We were all a family, and we moved through club to club and threw a party here one night, threw a party there, special event here, wherever we could fill a room. And say like Limelight was booked and we couldn't get that room. Oh, but Tunnel has this room open. You can switch and move your party to there. But Palladium, RPG, used to do these parties called the Burst Parties, and they were great. Like they booked Jam and Spoon to play live, and all these different, acts. I saw India there, and like Love and Happiness. Like when it first came out, that record, it was just like flashbacks of like these things. And if it wasn't for the flyers, I probably wouldn't even remember any of these things either. I was going to CBGBs at the same time as I was doing all the clubs and raves. Limelight would have band shows before the club nights would start too. So, and then or you had Rock and Roll Church. I mean, I saw Testament at Limelight, Mr. Bungle. Oh my God, the Mr. Bungle shows at Limelight were legendary. I mean, Pig Face. I saw I can't even begin to tell you the Cro-Mags. Like there was just so much like going on. Like I was there when Lenny Kravitz filmed the music video with the piano. He was a dick. Scott Weiland. We hung out. Oh, Johnny Depp. The night that Johnny Depp like trashed his hotel room, we were feeding him copious amounts of drugs at Limelight. And then we saw the newspapers in the morning where he trashed with Kate Moss, and we're like, whoa, like, holy fuck. It was like, did we do that? Did we have a hand in that? So Richard Bay, remember the Richard Bay show? Remember? No,
this is a talk show?
Yeah, it was a talk show. He
was
used
like
to
a Jerry Springer
kind
type
of, yes, but he was the first. He was before Jerry Springer. He used to come and party at Limelight all the time too. So you would have like these weird people, like celebrity. It was insanity.
I was kind of wondering who were some of the characters that you would see at Limelight like week in and week out. I mean, obviously there were some of the club kids who you were talking about, like Richie Rich and Astro Earl and Michael Allig and the It Twins, but who were some of the other people that you would have seen in there?
I mean, nobody's that would anybody really know, but they were just family to me and us. And it was just like my friends, Joe Rave, Jimmy Daly. It was just like the borough kids. We were there all the time. And like Arthur Weinstein, like you can't talk about Limelight without talking about Arthur Weinstein.
Who is this Arthur Weinstein?
Arthur Weinstein was the lighting director of Limelight, and he owned The World. He owned Harrah's, the Continental Bathhouses. He was a pinnacle of like New York City nightlife, and he introduced me to his daughter, who was I think a year or two younger than me, and we've just remained really good close friends all these years after because we were so close in age. And Arthur's like, "You sit with her." And in a DJ booth, also be like, "You sit over there." Like, it was this. I spent a lot of time in the DJ booth too, which is probably why I stayed out of a lot of trouble. Because it was either the dance floor or the booth, just listening to the music, watching. Because I was just always fascinated with like the technique of how the DJs would mix their records. Nobody mixes anymore. It's insane that the art of turntablism is really dead. People don't mix records the way they used to. There's a different feel of like playing on 3 turntables and then to see. And I never switched to CDJs. I've never tried. Because I wasn't a DJ, it wasn't my career. It wasn't real. So I was like, I don't really need to do this because I'll just stick and just collect my records.
Behold, here cometh the dreamer.
What was your day job when you were working at Limelight?
I worked for an oral surgeon. I was his assistant. Why? Because I loved huffing nitrous, and I would be able to huff nitrous after work while I would clean up the office and he would leave. Not enough that he'd notice, but enough to just make me happy. And I bought a 909 with the money that I made from that job. But after that, I went to work in a dental technician facility where we would make like dentures and stuff. And that was, I did just take these weird jobs, and it was just like, but because they paid good money, better money than working in a grocery store or working in a clothing store. And I needed to I needed to live and make real money. And then I started networking computers for the Human Resource Administration of New York City in like 1997, I believe, and which was great, but it took up all my time. And I needed that break, though, because 1997 is kind of when I dipped out a little bit because what was going on with Limelight and Michael Alec murdering Angel in 96, and my really good friend Nikki Fingers ODing on heroin and just the drugs. Everybody was a freaking junkie. And I was just like, I was having sort of like a mental breakdown, and I was just like, the raves weren't doing it. The music wasn't doing it. Everything was dark and ugly. Hardcore was falling out of favor. It was becoming really cheesy and something else that I was like, I need a break. I need to get out of this for a little bit. So I went to work. I really adapted very well to that. And then after that, I worked in the computer department for JP Morgan down on Wall Street, and I did a stint in Wall Street, but like everything else, I started feeling empty and started hating it, and I had to go back into the clubs and the music scene, which I never really left. So I got a job at Watts Music, I think 1998, 99-ish, and I worked there until 2003, 4, I believe. And from there, I went to work at Ultimate DJ Gear. I ran Ultimate DJ Gear, the American division, with Ralphie D for a couple of years.
So that was a company making DJ bags, and
they were out of Holland, and we ran their American division.
And what were you doing at Watts?
Watts. So when I first started Watts, this was when the digital, the websites were starting to become a thing, and I would record the samples of every record that would come in, and I would upload it onto their website. So people can, instead of calling in, because in the old days, if you didn't come to the warehouse, you would have to call, and one of the sales associates would play each record for you. It was really time consuming. So when the whole website thing came along and they built it, I would be the one that recorded the samples and put them on, and I would write descriptions. And then eventually I started selling domestic records to European distributors while I was doing that.
So this is just for people unfamiliar. The record distributor is where all the record stores will get their records. So there's a sheet that goes out, and this is like everything that came out this week that's sitting in a warehouse full of records.
Which could have been anywhere from like 300 to 500 records I would listen. So it was just, to me, I loved it. I was like, I really knew everything. I knew everything that came in. I knew everything that was coming out. I got the promos, and it was just amazing because all these DJs would come in from New York and be like, hey, Maria, what do you have for us? Because every DJ had their own style. I used to make my stacks for each individual, and, and it'd be like, oh, this is great. And I remember the house music, like Timmy Regisford, Sting International, Blaze, these guys would be coming in, and I would start feeding them like more tech house records. Not that I like tech house, but it would something that they could get into because there just wasn't enough soulful house records to give to them because people weren't really making it. I don't know. I will credit myself as like making the house guys get into techno.
Who were some of your favorite people that would come in there?
Gene LaFosse. Gene LaFosse was Victor Calderon's partner in Program 2. And he also used to go by the Genie. And, he would open up for Jeff Mills. And he is an amazing DJ, just didn't really pursue the career, made some really amazing records, but became a family man and, got another real estate. And Harry, the bastard, would put records aside for him. And I would be like, fuck that. Why is he getting all the good shit? So I used to steal records that would be in his pile, and I would put them in my pile, this camaraderie and fighting of who gets records. Watts was a great period of time. Wendy Paff and David Mena, Wendy was, boss bitch. Like Marianne, I forgot her last name, but like women basically really ran that company. And that's where I started seeing where women really had power and were respected. And it's behind the scenes. Then they just allowed the men to have their egos and do whatever they wanted, but they really ran the show and they really ran the shit.
At the same time, I feel like you really have to be super tough, especially back in those times if you're working, behind the scenes at a club, working at a record label, working at a distributor, like, especially in New York. Like, I don't know. Like,
I didn't feel that at all.
I think you're just used to it because you grew up here.
Yeah.
And you grew up with everyone.
I'm just used to people being jerks. That's it. And it's like, all right, whatever makes you happy. If you sleep better at night and that I can't, whatever. I just, you got to let it roll off your back and not get so offended by it. I don't really get offended by much. I offend. I don't really get offended though.
I was just, what I was thinking is because I was like, yeah, you grew up with like people like Frankie Bones who like, if you were just from somewhere else and you met Frankie Bones, you'd be like, what in the hell?
Well, you know what? Frankie back then isn't the Frankie now. Frankie was always like this savant though. He just has this brain and just all this information is in it. And he was always really intelligent that way. But as he got older, partying, like the drugs, I just think it affects your brain. At the end of the day, deep down inside, I just think Frankie has an amazing heart and very misunderstood because of his own doing, though. Sometimes I just wish he would zip it. But yeah, he's just a really talented soul and human, and he did so much. And he did so much for musically. And his brother Adam is one of my really, really dear friends that I love to death. I don't know what life would be without those crew people.
I'm bigger and bolder and rougher and tougher. In other words, sucker, there is no other. I'm the one and only dominator. I'm the one and only dominator. I'm tougher and rougher and bolder and bigger and I'm the one and only dominator. I'm the one and only dominator. Wanna kiss myself. I'm bigger and bolder and rougher and tougher. In other words, sucker, there is no other. I'm the one and only dominator. I'm the one and only dominator.
Was there a point at which it became like, okay, the cops are like showing up every time people are going to jail? We got to stop this? Or what was the sort of death knell of that?
Well, I think the death knell of that was 1996, 97. It was kind of, people still did them, but I stopped really going because I didn't like the people so much. Like a BTS came involved in the scene and they would just rob everybody. It just it got really dark. BTS is this crew of rave kids from the boroughs, and they were like a gang. They would just rob you they would jack you, they would shake you down for your money, for your drugs, and they would just, if you left a bag, you were able to leave something there and go back to it. And they were just this crew of kids that just stole, and they would just, and then dust became such a massive thing too in the scene, and then ketamine. I can honestly say ketamine ruined it. Ruined it, because you went from being extremely high and happy to being like falling asleep on yourself. And then from ketamine, people started doing heroin. Come on, why can't you stay home if you're going to fall asleep? I don't want to be out asleep. You're going out to, but, and then it just became really dark, it just became a really dark thing. And I just wanted to step away from that, and which is probably my transition. Because I went back to school and I went to get my broadcasting communications degree at Kingsborough. And then I started working for Def Mix in 2010. And I've been with Def Mix and Judy ever since. But because of the pandemic, I was like, all right, next step in life. I wanted a little bit out of the music scene anyway. I just wanted a little bit more stability and a paycheck in my life. And I became an accountant. Most of the time I'd be the money person at people's parties because I would always just count the money, do the payouts. And, that was just my thing. I'm really good with numbers. So I'm really good with taxes and everything. So I just run somebody's business now and I'm happy.
Yeah, well, everybody in the music business also needs an accountant. That's the thing, is nobody wants to be an accountant, but every single
I don't know why. I'm fascinated with
one.
counting money, and I'm fascinated with like paying bills and organizing
you could have been
books.
a drug dealer.
Yeah.
You're an accountant instead. So tell me a little bit more about Judy Weinstein.
Judy, what a titan. Another titan. Like, I thought Wendy Path and Marianne from Watts were titans until I met Judy Weinstein. It's an honor. Like, it really, really, really is an honor to be able to work for such a dynasty in music. There's so much that is owed to this human being and what she's done. Judy Weinstein was the manager of David Mancuso's Loft for a period of time, and then she went on to organize and form For the Record, which became one of the biggest record pools. And every single DJ who was anybody was a member of her record pool. And she kind of had a clubhouse of all these merry maniacs. And she broke so many records. She got stuff played on radio. She was, one of the instrumental people, I think, for like the 12-inch to become a thing and to have like dance remixes of records and songs made and pressed so they could be played in clubs. And I believe so, if I'm not mistaken, is the reason why there's even a dance remix category in the Grammys. And she did that. And Frankie Knuckles won the first Grammy for that the first year. And it's because of her that we even have that category in the Grammys. So she's done quite a lot.
So what has working with Judy Weinstein taught you? I mean, this is even another chapter in your life in like music and the music industry, because Def Mix is an artist management company, right?
Artist management, yes. And also they did a lot of music production. Like, Judy Weinstein orchestrated a lot of the remixes. There would be no David Morales. There would be no Frankie Knuckles. There would be none of these if it wasn't for her. She was the one that went and got all that money for these remixes, for like the Mariah, Dream Lover, David, she was the one that got David Morales's The Grind on MTV. And she's the businesswoman. She put together all of these deals. She got their residencies in Ibiza. She built their names. I mean, yes, of course, they're talented. But if you didn't have that businesswoman and that person to go out and get all of these things, we wouldn't have what we have today.
Like the remixes you're talking about are like the start of the era of the biggest pop acts in the world, then having like a house music remix. Yep. So yeah, your Mariah Carey's, like I guess Madonna was probably already having them, but like there definitely was a starting point where it was like, oh, all of a sudden like every pop song also has a remix record with all these names
Madonna
on it.
Like she was in that circle in the 80s because of like Jelly Bean. So like, like that was the scene, Judy hung out with like Sylvester and, Teddy Penn, all these people that would like just come through in the Paradise Garage. And I would go through all these pictures and stuff and I'd be like, wow, like Liza Minnelli. It was like, like Paradise Garage wasn't Studio 54 with the glitz and glamour, but music wise and respectable like club. That's what like the 80s, that was like the Paradise Garage time.
So has Judy imparted any like words of wisdom to you that you can share, or any?
She said to act like a lady and to not curse so much, because I curse like a truck driver, and I'm like a bull in a china shop. She taught me to be really, really honest, fair, and loyal, just and don't try to get over on people and pay everybody. You need to pay everybody their fair wage. Everybody needs to be happy. Everybody needs to eat, and everybody, needs to feel good about what they're doing.
What kind of stuff do you do at Def Mix?
I do the books. I do the contracts. I chase the money. I'm the collector. I do the itineraries. I do the hotels. I do the flights. But Judy's the one that negotiates the deals. I would help with the parties, like if they would do a Kings of House or David would do a show, I would do all the back end to make sure that everything night of went smooth.
I imagine you've seen the clubs change quite a few times, but if we can even remember what was going on like before the pandemic. What was kind of your view on the New York club scene before this all shut down?
Oh, well, the club scene was kind of stale. The underground scene in New York City is way better because those kids are like, the freaks, the geeks, the misunderstood ones, the ones that don't belong, the misfits. Like, they don't go to clubs anymore. And like the club kids, like Flash Factory, the people who go to Lady Fags parties, they're all the glitzy, pretty people. But some of those people do go to the underground ones too. The club business now is just a money-making machine between the drinks that you're selling, the admission tickets. It's just, it's not about curating a scene anymore. It's always been a business, but it's more business now than it ever was. The promoter was the more famous person than the DJ.
Yeah.
And then that kind of like shifted. And then the promoters started becoming the DJs because the DJs were getting more recognition, and it was such an egotistical thing. And just like watching that happen, and I was like, oh, okay, you're not a DJ. Why are you DJing? Like, you're not good at it. But because they wanted the notoriety that they weren't getting anymore. So I think that was the transition of like talentless people becoming DJs. That was like the beginning of it, when the promoter became a DJ, and that was it. Just all downhill from there.
From my perspective of New York, also the promoter has become like less and less important or like valued by the clubs. And it's just, I just see clubs booking like, okay, we'll book these headliners and then we'll book like whoever to open.
But that's the reason why a party doesn't have any standing power or stamina, and it's not a weekly occurrence, and it's so hard to have. Where do you go now where you can see the same people every week? It's not like that. The 90s was like that. It's just like, okay, you went for the club, you went for the atmosphere. Not that the music was secondary, but you just always knew that there would just be good music anyway, and you just went for the party. And then it just started transitioning over. And I can blame Mike Bingdra for that, because when he started doing Twilo and, and he started focusing, he was the one that...
Who is this guy?
Mike Bingdra is Made Events. And he was a barback at Limelight, and then became the booker and manager of Twilo. And his formula was to overpay the DJs so they wouldn't work at any other club in New York City. And that kind of was the transition when it went from actually having residents that played every week, and people went to this marketing hype of like, oh my God, we have these like $30,000 DJs from Europe, and this is the hottest party. And so that was a massive shift. There was a lot of things going on, but like Twilo, I think, was like one of the nails in the coffin for like New York City, having, these epic clubs with resident DJs.
What year was this?
1997-ish, I think. 1998, I believe. It's like Limelight got raided, and it was just like such an end, a horrible end to the 90s New York club scene. And so I think he saw an opportunity, and he saw how weak everything was, and Giuliani didn't help, and he just, took it and went with it. Business is business,
How was the scene curated in the past in ways that are not happening right now?
There was a lot of art, and the way the club was designed. So not only was it a musical thing, it was a very visual thing. And so Peter, he would hire a lot of like artists to come in and change the look of all the venues, curate new pieces, and, all the different rooms, like the sensation, like say for instance, like the Kenny Scharf room at Tunnel with all the furry walls and stuff. And it was just a cool place to sit down and chill out. You don't really have that kind of design anymore in a club. Everything is either really, really dark or really, really white. And it's kind of bland. I just think the club scene is really sterile.
I guess people were pouring insane amounts of money into these parties when you look at like what discos looked like in the 70s and 80s.
I don't know if it was a ton of money, but I just think all these artists hung out too. So it was a place for the artists to get their work out and their expression, as well as the DJ. Everything was art. You were a work of art. It just, everything was just art, and everything was living art, breathing art. And it's not like that today.
I feel like it all started happening before that, though, because I feel like starting in the late 90s, early 2000s is when it felt like every club that was opening just kind of had the same
Well, I told
look that
you,
you were talking about.
1996, it started dying, like with Giuliani coming in and cleaning up the streets where things weren't dirty, gritty, and dangerous, And when it became sterile, homogenized, and like you cleaned up New York City, you kind of like got rid of, there's a seediness to the New York City nightlife scene, or at least there was. You were brushing up arms with like pimps and like gangbangers and like Latino king. You didn't know, but you didn't know. The air of danger was there. You could have been next to like a serial killer and not know. But and now it's just, I don't think any of that's happening.
Do you remember what it felt like when Giuliani started, quote unquote, cleaning things up?
I was caught in a lot of raids for after hours and stuff. And, it felt like we were really bad people doing bad things and, really feeling like a criminal and just really feeling unwanted, even in your own city. And, and being told that, no, your kind is not welcomed anymore.
There was like another burst of that too. I guess it was like 2005, 6, something like that, when they started enforcing the cabaret law again.
Yeah, which we originally fought in the 90s. We started because they were using that to do all the raids. That was like when Giuliani, he dug that one up and he used that to really go after a lot of the after hours and illegal parties because he's like, oh, well, you're doing illegal cabaret law, no dancing, you don't have a license, you can't do this. And, and then it kind of died out because he did what he wanted to accomplish. He kind of stopped that whole scene, and then it happened again, but like it finally got beat. That's the one good thing about the social media aspect of it is it brought it to the masses. Nobody else cared because it just affected such a small percentage of people. But with social media, it blew up where it became such a media event that people are like, oh, wow, this is racist. You can't do this because it was a racist law. That's why the law was put on the books,
Yeah, I mean, it was good to see the club scene finally band together over an issue after years of everybody just fighting.
Dancing should not be illegal. It's just insane,
I like to think that hopefully after the Black Lives Matter protests and some of the things that have happened during the pandemic and in the US in the last couple years, that people have more of a sense of caring for other people. I mean, I definitely feel like social media is a blessing and a curse, but in terms of throwing renegades and underground parties and kind of connecting with people, I do think it is sort of the next wave of like how people can throw illegal things without...
That is only dependent on the person throwing the party and what their intentions are. If you have a party promoter that the only intention is to make money, none of those social causes will matter. They'll use it as a way to make the money, but the work that goes behind to actually make a difference, they won't put into it. Which is the reason why you brought up a question about Melting Point and the loss of Britney and what she meant to me. And it was just a girl that really wanted to engage change, and she wanted to engage other people into wanting to make a change for the better for people who are less fortunate. And she brought together all the misfits and all the kids, and she created a home and a safe haven for them. And the loss of her is massively huge. Hold on, I actually wrote something really nice. New York City and potentially the world suffered a massive loss with the passing of Britney. She was a true Pied Piper. The youth that she gathered and gave meaning and a sense of community to is something that I have not experienced since the early days of the Brooklyn rave scene and what Bones and Lenny did for our generation. Britney took it to a place where we never did. She wanted to put her money where her mouth was. She donated almost everything she made to Al Otro Lotto, an organization that provides holistic, legal, and humanitarian support to indigenous refugees, deportees, and other migrants in the U.S. and Tijuana through a multidisciplinary, client-centered, harm reduction-based practice. They provided direct, free legal services on both sides of the U.S.-Mexico border and beyond. Most of the promoters I have ever met would donate such a small portion, and that was just to make them look like they had a soul. Brittany really had one. Aside from the devotion she had to charity and human rights, she was a lover of hardcore and performed a miracle and resurrected the hardcore scene that the Industrial Strength crew and myself have kept on life support. I honestly thought the youth of America just wouldn't even understand us or want to feel the raw intensity that hardcore encompasses, but she was all about it and spread that message, and the kids listened. I wish she was still here with us. It's not fair that the other side takes such pinnacle humans away from the living. I loved her. I wish I had more time with her.
Melting Point parties did something really amazing, bringing people together and also really adding this political element in an authentic and confrontational and active way that I hadn't really seen anybody in the scene do. Like, I went to an amazing event that Melting Point threw outside the ICE headquarters in New York City, where people were playing like the most aggressive hardcore and punk electronic stuff. And we were dancing in the plaza and headbanging out front of the ICE headquarters and creating a complete racket that I'm sure was totally pissing off all the cops and the ICE agents, reclaiming this public space in New York for New Yorkers who were super pissed off because this was when ICE they are continuing to treat immigrants and migrants like shit and deport them and separate them from their families. And nobody had kind of taken that super punk stance like against the law and paired it with the rave culture in like a long time that I could remember. So I was really wondering how you became involved with Brittany and with Melting Point.
Brittany sought me out. I guess she's heard of me. I mean, I've been with Industrial Strength and have thrown their parties for a long time now, and I've booked Lenny repeatedly throughout the years and have championed and promoted, and I spent most of my personal party career throwing hardcore parties. She asked my opinions on how to do certain things, and she wanted to book Lenny, and I was like, Lenny, come on, we have to do this, even if the money isn't right, it doesn't matter. And Lenny was just like really all about it because like none of us are Trump supporters, none of us really approved or liked anything, and this was something that we can really, really be a part of and support 100% because it's everything that we stand for too. And, it's just like equal rights for all. And, our music is political. Our music is against the grain, and it is to like make a stand. So Brittany was the life that we needed in New York City, and it is such a massive loss.
How would you like to see things moving forward? I mean, we're in an interesting time. Like, there's obviously been, plague raves and people throwing parties during the pandemic. And
listen, if it wasn't a pandemic where other people's health was at risk and this was a government thing where they were suppressing us, I would have been out there in the streets throwing frickin' parties too. But it wasn't. It was, if I throw a party, I know what it is to have people die in front of you. There, 1997, like I said, I had a mental breakdown. New Year's Eve party, South Jersey, Cherry Hill Expo Center, LSD, Let's Start Dancing, New Year's Eve, the EMTs came and turned the lights on in the middle of the party and were pulling people out on stretchers in droves because there was a bad batch of ecstasy going and people were dropping like flies. This one girl freaking collapsed and had a fucking heart attack in front of me from snorting too much cocaine. Driving after the party, I see this car rolled over in a ditch. They had to have a jaws of lice, and this kid had his leg amputated. So you want to talk about a nervous breakdown, realizing that, wow, I'm working in an industry where people are coming to die. I never wanted to really work on a party on that massive of a scale. And I think this party was 10,000 people in 1997. And, that was like the last party kind of that we threw like that, because it's just the responsibility. You have people's lives in your hands. And I don't think people realize the responsibility to each other, which is the reason what really pisses me off about, because nobody cares. You know what? All they give a shit. You know what the plague raves were about? Unless they were like free, it was money. It was people need, and I understand people need to survive, but I can't make money off of somebody else's benefit, like health, or that's not, I can't do that.
What do you feel like are like the keys to longevity in this business or this like party culture, or as a DJ?
Well, let's look at Lenny, for instance, right? He always focuses on the next generation and the youth, and it's not really about himself, because, he already accomplished what he had to accomplish. But here you have a record label, and it's about nurturing the next generation, because it is about them. It's about the kids, it's not about you, and if you don't have that attitude of it not being about you and about just ushering in and helping the youth along this path, I think that's the key to longevity. It's just about being good to the people behind you and bringing them forward, even if they pass you.
What are some of your favorite records of all time?
Oh, you can't. I mean, there's just so many records that you would be surprised. Ugh. One of my favorite trance records on the planet is Lee Kwan Point Zero. It's just so beautiful. I remember hearing it at Limelight for the first time. Gonzo played it, and I was like on so much ecstasy, and it was just like so like ethereal and like spiritual. And I was like, oh my God. And then Sigma 909's The Power of Ecstasy. I believe in the power of ecstasy. Fucking awesome record. Jelly Beans, Just a Mirage, and the Mexican, the Texican. There's just so many. Eekville Hawken, like so many industrial strength records. We have arrived, Masculine Unlimited. Anything and everything that Lenny D has ever put his hands on is a great record. I love all of the Bones Break records, Underworld records. I mean, Hiker by Marco Cardapane. It's just bass, distorted bass, and it just, on a loud sound system, just like, you want a massage, just like put your body up against it. It'll like loosen every tight tension that you have. Just so many, it's just anything that's moving and like just like sad kind of too. I'm not really big into happy.
Is there anything I didn't ask you about that you wanted to talk about?
No.
All right. Maria, thank you so much for being here on Rave to the Grave. It was a total pleasure.
Oh, I totally raved to the grave. I'm shocked I'm still here.
Rave to the Grave is recorded at the historic Newsstand Studios at Rockefeller Center in the heart of NYC. Follow them on Instagram at Rockefeller Center. This podcast has been produced and hosted by me, Vivian Host. Our engineer is superstar Joe Hazen. You can find more extras and music from all of our episodes at ravetothegrave.org. And for archival photos and flyers, follow us on Instagram at ravetothe.grave. Make sure you check out our other episodes on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like Rave to the Grave, please consider leaving us a rating or a comment. It really helps us out. Until next time, permission to party.